Welcome to Satsang. Most people complain about the things that are going wrong in their lives. If you're living in the illusion, that is what happens. You may have lived in this world maybe 50, 60, 20, whatever year, and you still expect things not to go wrong. If you're living in the head, it is not that much possible for things to not go wrong. Maybe for temporary period of time, it may happen. And even this temporary period of time for things to not go wrong is an illusion. You can have illusion for having things to not go wrong. You can still live in that illusion if you are living in an advanced, industrialized country perhaps. But you travel to India, then you can no longer live in the illusion that things around you are solid and you feel like you're in control. You will realize that you're not in control there. Nothing that you plan is going to work out there. Everything is going to be totally different from the way you expected, and things will constantly challenge you. Forms and whatever you look, the world is not as solid as it seems to be here. Wherever you go there are old people on the street, there are dying people on the street. But in the Western world, where are the old and dying people here? We don't see any. They're shot away. We mustn't look, right? We just need to pretend that they don't exist. We put them away there. The old and dying people go here. And dead bodies, we never look to dead bodies. It's very hard unless you have a very close relative. If you ever want to see a dead body, they won't let you. They will say that you are mad. But if you're in India, you see dead bodies very easily. It's normal there. So you get a much more better sense of the fragile nature of the world of things, objects and forms. How insubstantial this world actually is. And it's only in the West that you have the illusion that the world of form is very substantial, solid, and it's going to last. It is there. It has a solidity and permanency. It looks like that, but of course it doesn't. So the world of objects isn't as solid as it seems to be. The world of bodies isn't as permanent and solid as it seems to be. It is very, very fragile, fleeting, insubstantial. So if that is all you know, then you are lodged in the fleeting, insubstantial universe. And of course there is going to be a constant fear when you identify with that. It's very much like the Buddha, because the story goes that he was born into great wealth and his father did not want him to see that there is poverty, that people grow old and people die. So he had to already reach a fairly advanced age. He was probably 25 or 30 and wasn't really aware that there is such a thing as old people being ill or dying, because he lived in this place and it sounds like it is West nowadays. His father decided, let's shut him away, and one day he saw it. Of course, his father didn't want him to see it because it had been predicted he would either become a great king or a spiritual teacher. And his father didn't want him to become a spiritual teacher. He wanted him to carry on his business of being a king. But the father had made the biggest mistake he could have made. He waited for so long when finally he did go out. It was such a shock when he saw that people are lying on the streets, people are dying and ill and old, and he saw dead bodies. He said, "What is this? What happened to this man? He's not moving anymore." And they said, "He's dead." Dead? What does it mean to be dead? And that happens to everyone? And then what's the point in anything? And sooner or later, he left everything behind. In the middle of the night, the story goes, when everybody was asleep. And this is a beautiful metaphor here. Everybody around him was asleep, and he walked out. So he said, if that's all there is, so his search then was for that dimension, there's something else to life than just that. It lasted a few years. He tried all the practices, tried to achieve a state of perfection. In fact, he got very good at all the practices, and yet didn't take him to the realization of space consciousness. And one day he would almost starve himself to death when he said, basically, "I've had enough. Enough, give me some food." And they brought him some food. And most disciples left him. They said, "Oh, he's lost his way. He is eating again." And then he ate normally, and he sat under a tree. And suddenly something happened. All resistance collapsed. He was no longer looking for anything to happen. There was surrender to what is, not looking for some state anymore. And there it was. And there is a film, The Little Buddha, which is some nice things in it, although it's too much about the legendary of Buddha, but there's still beautiful scenes in it. The last thing that disturbs him is when he is sitting under a tree and he sees his reflection in a little puddle of water. Self-reflection. He sees his face in the little puddle of water next to him, and he is fascinated by that suddenly. And suddenly an arm comes out of this pool of water and tries to pull him down, and he frees himself, and then the reflection is gone. This is the last attempt by the ego to be there as an object in his consciousness, to see himself as someone, to remain there as an object in his consciousness, a mental object, making himself into a mental object and then have a relationship with it. I love myself, I hate myself. Now, do I really hate myself? I must remind myself on the bathroom mirror that I love myself. Affirmations. I love myself. You have a relationship with yourself. Of course, it's better to love yourself than to hate yourself. It makes life a little easier. But when you love yourself, there is always the other side of the possibility that you might also hate yourself. Better to go beyond loving and hating yourself by not having a relationship with yourself at all, by simply being yourself. And you can only be yourself as space consciousness, not as an object. So anything that goes wrong in your life, a form that appears and you allow it to be, that form becomes an opening into the formless within you. So your spiritual practice is whenever something goes wrong in your life, and luckily enough it happens a lot, Not saying that you cannot improve your life. You can improve your life greatly via using affirmations or personal developments. You can create a much better reality for yourself, which is nice. You can create through applying the power of thought and action and visualization. You can improve your life considerably. You can live in a bigger, more beautiful place, feel better about yourself, and so on. But you cannot escape from the other from arising. Sooner or later, the another polarity, no matter what situation you go into, and I'm not saying you shouldn't improve your life here, it's great, but do not expect it to be free of the other polarity which will arise. Even if you're living in dimension, something will go wrong. And that's what the gossip magazines are all about. The gossip magazines are all about things that going wrong in mansions. And that makes people feel a little bit better about things going on in their little houses. But actually it is the same. And they love reading about or watching about famous people and things that are going wrong in their lives. They are saying, oh, isn't that great? Their lives are all collapsing, just like mine. Whenever you are judging people, are you aware that you also identify them with their unconscious behavior? But what if the human beings are doing crazy things? Because it is obvious. Is it still a judgment that we call human beings are crazy? There is a really thin line between judgment and making an observation. So we can say that human beings are crazy. So how is that not being a judgment? What judgment really means in spiritual terms is to equate something that you see in another, a deficiency, a characteristic that is regarded as not so good, to equate that with who that person is in their essence, their identity. If you see unconsciousness in another human being, which you can do easily, unconscious behavior, either in an individual human being, they get insanely angry, they get depressed, they misinterpret everything, they project their insecurities onto you, they project their fears onto somebody else, they make enemies everywhere. Of course, in this situation, it will be absurd to say, that person is fine. You can clearly see that the behavior is totally irrational and insane and creates continuous suffering for themselves and others too. So you see that whether or not you verbalize it, it is secondary, but you see it. And you might say, this person is unconscious, which does not mean that you equate their behavior or what they do with who they are. If you make an identity out of it, then it's a judgment. So if I said he is crazy, that will probably be a judgment. But if I see their behavior as crazy and realize that is the egoic mind operating in them, they are manifesting behavior that corresponds to the present evolutionary stage of human consciousness, it is not who they are. It is the way in which they manifest the unconsciousness that is still part of the collective human consciousness. That's all. So basically the answer is, when it's not equated with who they are, when you're not making an identity for them out of whatever behavior they manifest, then it's not a judgment. The judgment becomes when we say he is or she is such and such. Let's say he is a liar. That's a judgment. But he often lies is not a judgment. Because you can see that the lying is something that is a manifestation of his egoic state of consciousness for him. He believes, presumably, that he can gain some advantage from telling things that are not true, enhancing himself or whatever. Many egos say things that are not true to enhance themselves, for example. But the moment I make it into an identity, like he is a liar, that is a huge trap I have put myself in, not just him. I put myself in because I'm making an identity for another human being out of their unconscious behavior. Once I have done that, once I have attached a huge label, mental label, onto another human being, next time I meet this human being, I'm not really meeting them anymore. I'm meeting my judgments. I'm looking at them through the screen of the label that I have already given them, that I mentioned to others. You know that he is a liar, don't you? I told my friends. But next time he comes, you're not meeting a human being. You're meeting a liar. And by doing that, you have yourself reduced yourself. You get trapped in your own judgments. The way in which you relate to this person is diminished. You're not relating freely anymore to that person. You yourself become constrained by your judgments, because the mental concept will control your behavior towards him also. So that's why there's a saying, when you judge yourself. Something like that. So there we need to be careful when we make pronouncements about others, when we transform their behavior that we deem unconscious into an identity for them. Now that becomes extreme when somebody is extremely unconscious. Even then it applies. Let's say he is a thief. Now it may be true that he is living by stealing things, but you need to be careful with these things, because it could be that this person suddenly realizes, perhaps in prison, realizes the transcendent dimension in him or her, and wakes up. And even a murderer could wake up, and it has happened and does happen, that if they suffer enough, as they will, the moment comes, usually not necessarily in this lifetime, but for some it has come, they wake up. People who have murdered even more than one person, they wake up and suddenly the unconditioned consciousness emerges. And it emerged because the suffering that afflicted not only on others but on themselves through their actions or behaviors was so extreme, so that the ego self-destructed. And then something emerged, and suddenly they wake up. Now, therefore, I will say, even to call someone a murderer is a judgment. But to recognize that this person may be dangerous even to you, that he may need to be confined to a prison because he is a danger to others, that's the case. But to impose, to make an identity, nobody is incapable of waking up. Even seemingly very evil people, sometimes awaken, only through intense suffering in their case. But anytime we make an identity for a person out of something that they do, that becomes a huge limitation that we impose on them and on ourselves. So you see clearly what a person does, but it's not what this person essentially is. And the same applies to groups of people or humanity as a whole. If we say the human beings are crazy, which means, of course, human beings are doing crazy things. What we are saying is many human beings alive on this planet are still unconscious and manifest behavior that corresponds to their unconsciousness. They create suffering for themselves and others, and they know not what they do. And then when you hear the religious book says, forgive them for they know not what they do. Really, forgive them means don't make an identity for them out of what they do. But of course, don't deny it either. So the deeper meaning of forgiving somebody is to recognize that in essence, that's not who they are. Which does not mean that they don't have to suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness. That happens by itself. And sometimes there's the karmic consequences of a person's deep unconsciousness may come through the judicial system, and sometimes through other ways. How do you deal with the losses you have in your life? These losses could be an emptiness left by people or things or possessions you have. You had it, you had the possessions, you had people in your life, and you had beautiful things in your life, but now there is an empty space. Now there is something deeply significant about the empty space that are left behind by any kind of loss. You may get back those losses, maybe the possessions that you lost, you can try again, and you can have a possession that is appreciated by society. But now do you realize that there is only an empty space there? And here it is vital that if you can stop and face that empty space without running away from it or cursing the empty space or immediately going into the reactive mood. And for example, the empty space can also be left by relationships. The wife, the partner, the husband. One day you get home and there's a letter which says that I'm leaving. And at that moment, what form that this moment takes, and here we come to something very significant, the form that this moment takes sometimes is an absence of the form that was there a moment before. And because suddenly there is no form where there was a form before, this is an enormous opening into the deeper awareness of the formless consciousness, unconditioned, formless that you are, if you cannot run away from it, if you can face this death. Because the loss of anything is a small death. The loss of the bells that you have had for years is a small death, because the form is gone. The loss of your car is a death. And of course, there may be an actual death. And this is an amazing thing. The person that was here every day in this room used to sit in this chair. That's where the desk, where they sat. And one day the message comes, they're gone, passed away. And then you look at the empty chair, the person was so real, it seemed so permanent to have that personality sitting in that armchair, doing its thing, working, talking, having his opinions. It's inconceivable that suddenly that person has dissolved. Just dissolved. Gone. This is the empty space that is left behind by death. Whenever a form dissolves in your life, it may be an actual death, it may be the loss of something that had been important to you. If you can face that hole that is left behind by the form that is no longer there, because it's a temporary hole into the dimension of formless. Now, one could almost say God, the formless, one life, the formless, timeless, one consciousness that underlies all manifestation, momentarily shines through whenever there is a hole in the tapestry of physical existence. That's kind of the tapestry of forms. And in this tapestry of forms, which is gigantic, regularly or all the time, holes appear. Let's just use the metaphor and say the entire physical universe, sense-perceived universe, imagine it as an extremely complex tapestry. Huge, of course. And you look at it. And then you see continuously, here and there, little things suddenly disappearing and temporary holes being there, opening up in the tapestry. And then suddenly there and there. So part of that tapestry, it continuously coming and going, out and into form. No form in this tapestry remains for long, and so holes open up continuously in it, and then they are replaced by something else. But if you can be aware of the holes, the openings, something shines through them that is not to do with the form, but the essence of all form, and that is enormously peaceful. There is enormous peace and aliveness there, and that is the grace. That lies concealed in any kind of death, accidental death, seemingly premature death, any kind of death, and any kind of loss, potentially. But it doesn't help you if you deny it or run away from it. If you say, no, I don't want to see that hole, and you cover up the hole with reactions immediately so that you don't have to face the emptiness. So when emptiness comes into your life, that is beautiful, potentially, a beautiful opening in which you can actually find yourself. You find yourself by not resisting that. And so you begin to welcome death when it comes, because it is an inseparable part of this world of form. Whenever you are in suffering, realize that you attached to your mind-made sense of self. And this mind-made sense of self enhancing itself by creating more suffering. Whenever you want to break that attachment, you may want to enter the state of stillness, maybe for 1 second or 2 seconds here and there. And you need to know that stillness is the death that you enter voluntarily. You choose to enter to that state Whenever you are suffering, you need to ask yourself, is that what I want? If you're ready for it, to relinquish your attachment to the structures of thoughts, to step out of the stream of thinking, is death, because thinking is form, primordial form. To step out of that is death. The arising of stillness is your death. The death of the little me. Of course it is. And there are still many humans on the planet who are not ready for that. They want to stay entangled in form. They want a continuation of the drama of form. They don't want an end to the drama. Many humans on the planet still are not ready for the end of suffering. Even if the possibility were presented to them, they would run away in fear. It will seem like, no, the end of suffering will seem like a kind of death. The end of my drama, I don't want that. So, but there are many humans also who are ready to stop suffering, to come to the end of suffering. It's an evolutionary development. Now, for this shift to happen to you, there is one requirement, and we can put it in simple language. You need to be fed up with suffering. Not run away from it, not avoid it, but be fed up with it. You say, I have it enough. And if you are in psychological suffering, and all suffering is psychological suffering, the rest may be pain, toothache or headache, whatever it may be. You can ask yourself at any moment, when you can see that you are in suffering, is that what I want? Is that what I'm choosing at this moment? Is that what I'm creating at this moment? Humanity as a whole is coming to the point where this suffering is just too much. It's been going on for so long. And for most of you, it is true. You have suffered enough. But it needs to be true for you that realization needs to come to you so that no situation, nothing that happens to you is converted into drama and suffering anymore. And the quickest way out of that, out of converting events, situations, interactions with people into drama and suffering, is to be present moment centered, not story centered, not thought centered, not imposing interpretations and stories on the present moment, allowing the moment to be and as it is. Eckhart Tolle gave a simple example of what is the mechanism that makes up the manufacture of drama and suffering in people's lives, the mental mechanism, the mechanicalness behind it. He gave a brief example in the little book called Stillness Speaks, where in one entry starts with 3 statements. One statement says, "What a miserable day." The other statement says, "He didn't have a decency to return my call." The other statement says, "She let me down." Then the text explains a little bit that these are the stories that you impose on the situations and events and people in your life. And those are very simple examples. But even the complicated drama basically works according to that same principle. It's just that the stories that you impose become more complex. But this is where they start. And the stories are imposed In many cases, one of their main reasons for being there is to enhance your egoic, mind-made sense of self, to be right. Because if you're right, if you can complain about this miserable weather, unconsciously, the mechanism behind this is you have made the weather wrong and yourself right. You are in a superior position because you're complaining about it. If you can say he didn't have decency to return my call, it implies this is unconscious, that you of course are morally superior in every way to this person. This is the position that you're coming from. I'm not saying you do not see that certain people do very unconscious things. You see it, of course. But the story then personalizes it. You find a reactive and personalized relationship to somebody's perhaps unconsciousness, and then use it to enhance your mind-made sense of self. This doesn't mean that you don't see dysfunctional behavior for what it is, but you don't have a personalized reactive relationship to it anymore. You allow that to be also. There is no person there. There is only an human unconsciousness. You don't enter into that personalized relationship with that form, which is story-based. She let me down. That is the ego's story. But she wasn't there when I was there. That's the event without the story. It's raining. That is without the story. But that's a miserable day. This is with the story. He didn't call. That's the event without the story. But he didn't have the decency to return my call. That is your ego talking. Have you ever used prayers in your life? Or you might be using every day. How to use it, whether to use it at all. Prayer can mean many different things, and there are many different kinds of prayers. There are petitionary prayers. You would like something. They may sometimes work, but you never know whether it was the prayer. You would have gotten it anyway. There are more effective ways if you really feel that you need to want something, but be careful, it won't make you happy. And that's another story. If you really feel you want something, you can use affirmations and visualizations. And when you get it, enjoy it. Don't look for yourself in it. Don't look for deep inner fulfillment or some kind of permanently enhanced sense of self or permanent happiness. Nothing that you achieve can give you that. Knowing that, you can play around with the world of form. And Jesus already explained how to pray for something, and that is when he said, when you pray for something, feel as if you already had it, as if it had already been given. So you're not saying, I want something, because if you say, I want something, it affirms a lack. It says on the other side, the unexpressed side, I don't have it. So when you say, I want it, you're also stating that you don't have it. So you're praying at the same time not to have it. If you affirm and visualize that is already here, and you feel as if you had it, that's the feeling that you want to get from it, because you're already imagining and you feel as if you had it. That is the feeling that you want to get from it. You already have that feeling, and that is the truth, because you're imagining that it's going to give you feelings of peace or happiness, which is always in you already, if you just go inside deep enough. But I don't want to discourage you from playing around in the world of forms. So why not to try that out? Visualize that it is already yours, as if you have it, and feel as if you have it. There are other prayers that are used in different religions, and they can be called pointers. They are more advanced prayers. They point us to a particular state. It's not that uttering those words produces magically the state. What matters when you utter certain words or prayers, and most of them are short, is really the stillness that comes after that. Buddhism, for example, has the metta meditation, which is a kind of prayer, which starts with, I believe, may everybody on this planet be well and happy. And then after you've uttered those words, there is a stillness. And then it says, may everybody in this country be well and happy. Metta means loving kindness. And then there is a stillness. May every being in this city be well and happy. And then there's a stillness. May everybody in this house be well and happy. May I be well and happy. And it takes you into stillness. And the being of well and happy is already there in this stillness. It's there. It spreads. You could become still. It will spread anyway, even without the words. Because whatever state of consciousness you're in affects the totality, and in turn is the totality manifesting through you. And we have the beautiful Christian prayer by Saint Francis. Let me be an instrument of thy peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love, and so on. Where there's injury, pardon, and so on. And those prayers are openings. They open the door, and they always take you into stillness. And they're beautiful. Most prayers operate still on the level of duality. Even when you say, let me be an instrument of thy peace, you are still using the language of duality. This is me, and thy, presumably, is God. There is me and there is God. So God is perceived still as something or someone separate from me. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful prayer. And if stillness follows the prayer, in the stillness you have transcended the duality. So most prayers are dualistic. Although the metta prayer in Buddhism, may all beings be well and happy, it's fine, there's no duality there. Although you are still saying there are many beings, ultimately there is only oneness. And then there are short things that are almost like mantras, just single words. Peace, for example. The word itself doesn't produce peace, but it's a pointer. Stillness, one of the most beautiful pointers to found in the Old Testament. Be still and know that I am God. And this is why if we can call that a prayer, it is a kind of prayer where duality is transcended. And it is a miraculous prayer. The words of which it consists are all synonyms for one single thing. Be still. Know I am God. Be, being, one being in Sanskrit. Being and stillness are one. It is the stillness of being itself before it comes into existence as something. Be still and know. In stillness that is being there is a deep knowing, non-conceptual. a deep intelligence. Not words, not thoughts, deeper than thoughts, because it's the primordial seed of intelligence. Be still. Know I am. It is the innermost sense of beingness, or I am. God, the divine, the source, the one. And you put these words together, each verse signifies also the other. They are all one. Be still and know I am God. It's a miraculous prayer. So those are advanced prayers and powerful. Be still and know that I am God is one of the most powerful and beautiful pointers to the truth. And these rare ones use language without taking you into duality. Do you have complainers around you? People that are complaining all the time to you. How do you deal with people who are always complaining? Do you spend less time with unconscious people and comment on their complaining? If that's so, some days you would have to practice all day. Not just some days, but you will practice all day. The story is the momentum of the egoic mind. It will try to draw you in some way to make you part of the story. The story very often in people is energized even more by their pain body. Then the story can be quite a violent story. So there's a story, but it's energized by enormous emotion, which is past emotion to a large extent, not necessarily generated by this little event. Of course, that was the triggering event, but the emotion is far deeper. It's human pain that has lived in each human being for millennia and has built up. It is inherited human pain. That's what we call pain body. This energy field, this residue of past emotion, of past emotional suffering that lives in humans, tends to use the mind to renew itself, to feed on your thinking. And that becomes the story that is energized by human pain. At other times, it may just be the mind pattern without the energizing effect of the pain body. But even that has a strong pulling power. Your greatest weapon, so to speak, is stillness as you listen to the story of other person. And you will notice that's not a weapon that you can fight actively with, because the moment you fight the story in someone, you become part of it, you will realize. Even if you say you're in a story, the moment you start talking, that will become a story. Your story will be that they have a story. And of course they will insist, no, this is the reality. And they will tell you, no, you're denying. You're in complete denial of reality. And you will say, no, I'm not in denial of reality. And the conversation will go on and you will create new stories from that place. So the most vital thing is simply to be there as a still presence. And is that easy? We can say yes and we can say no. It is easier if you're connected with the inner body as the stories happen around you. As you're listening, so you're rooted here, deep within, and that keeps you still, keeps your mind still. And from there, there's attention that flows out. And in that attention, you're aware not only of that which is arising in this moment, which is the story that you're listening to, you're also aware of the field of attention. And as you're aware of the field of attention, it becomes easier to connect with something in other human being that lies underneath the story. So you can sometimes to some extent bypass this story and connect with that human being at a deeper level, where there lies their own stillness. It's nobody's stillness, but just let's put it like that. So you can miraculously sometimes connect from the stillness within you to their stillness. And then on top, you have floating the story. And sometimes that can actually dissolve the story in other person, or at least shorten it. Because otherwise, it goes on and on and on. Some people have stories that they live with years and years, and just things get added to it. New episodes gets added to their story, latest new episode in their story. It is not surprising that people love watching soap operas, because they all have their own one going too, and then they feel better, and they say, you see these people on TV? They have theirs too, so it must be all important and very real. But at least when you're watching it on TV, you can feel, oh, at least that's not my problem. It does require a high degree of alertness, not to be drawn into somebody's story, not to become part of it. Now, they may already have made you part of it in a way. They have maybe already decided that you have your assigned place in their story. And of course, there's nothing you can do about that. You will be drawn into their story. But not make the story continue in your mind and then link into theirs. Almost anything you say in a situation like that is going to be too much. The mental egoic sense of self can have some prejudices against what this moment takes, what this moment becomes as form. But first of all, we may need to convince the little me for getting into that deep, vast presence. And from there, experientially, this little me will know, from now on, it will know that miracle happens through just saying yes to this moment and whatever form it takes. Very often, the form that this moment takes is some form of limitation, or it looks like a limitation on your life. And that's why people don't like the now, because every time new form arises in the now, it seems to be more often than not just like another limitation. And so there is this deep longing, and this is the seeking for who you are beyond the limited. And it seems that the present moment is your enemy, because all it gives you, or most of the time, is some more limitation through the person that you don't want to be having to confront, a situation you don't want to have to confront, but it's here. And even if suddenly your life changes dramatically through winning $10 million in the lottery, of course, there's a delusion for a moment that now you, the unlimited, has arrived. And then these other limitations will come very quickly, perhaps even created by your wealth. You will very quickly find new limitations entering to now. And so this is why, since there is this deep-seated search to know yourself as unlimited, this is why it seems so nonsensical, especially to the little me, it seems nonsensical to accept the present moment. It says like, are you telling me that I should accept that limitation on my life and then be stuck with it forever? This doesn't make any sense. And so people live in that continuous denial, trying to get to a future point where you added enough to be free and unlimited. And so the circle continues. Now, the only way to break the circle is to say yes internally to the form that this moment takes. And yes, it will probably be more often than not some form of limitation, seemingly. But you cannot go beyond limitation by running away from the limitation, or denying it, or mentally projecting yourself to a moment where you are free. Amazing miracle happens when internally you say yes, totally to the form that this moment takes, even if it is a limitation or appears to be a limitation on you. Internally, it is not resisted. In other words, you allow this moment to be as it is completely. This does not mean that now you're passive. You're condemned to sitting for the rest of your life like the Buddha and not move anymore. Of course, the Buddha was moving continuously. He traveled and he talked and he taught. So you're not condemned to inactivity here. It doesn't mean that you cannot change the situation. It doesn't mean that you cannot take action anymore. It simply means the basis for action is the state of acceptance and surrender, and yes to now. The basis for action is not denial of life. A little egoic entity trying to strengthen itself, which becomes a motivating factor for action or to protect itself. The two motivating factors for action in the egoic state are desire, the need for more, or fear. I should protect myself because I might lose the little that I have. So these two motivate people, and in normal existence there are no other motivating factors except desire and fear. They motivate what people do and say, speak and think, or they are all the compulsive thought movements. If you look into them, they are governed by desire and fear. And this is the trap. Humans are trapped in that. And that's their little me. And they don't know the essence of their being as unlimited. They don't know who they are beyond the little person with its little past and little future. So we move into the state of total, unconditional, even I can say radical acceptance of now. No argument with it internally, because it is futile to argue with is. It is. What is, is. How can you argue with what is? Past pain that you carry, traumas and the events that you have lived in the past, they may be blocking you from being present. But at the same time, this situation can be really good teacher. But whenever you are in that mood of being in that past traumatic events and pain that you carry, how is it possible to go beyond those? Need for escaping from that pain body is because the state of consciousness in you wants to emerge. If it didn't want to emerge, there would be nothing that we could do. Sometimes people ask, is there anything that we can do? Actually, the answer to this is yes and no. To totally say yes to now, one could say it is almost a non-doing, but everything else is doing. And now you need to be aware of one thing, and That is the planet having suffered from human unconsciousness, having suffered from human dysfunction of the collective human mind for thousands of years. There is an accumulation on the planet, an accumulation of, one could almost say, pain or heavy negativity, an energy field of that humans have created over thousands of years. A field of pain in the collective of the planet. That is often something that will emerge inside you as what Eckhart calls the human pain body. That is past pain that lives in you from your personal life, childhood, from parents, what they did or didn't do. Humans carry inside their share of human pain, emotional pain, which is no more than a contracted life energy through egoic delusion. So this is something that you need to recognize, because otherwise that can obscure your practice of uncompromising yes to what is, and many times obscure the arising consciousness if you cannot recognize it. The pain body that humans carry as their share of human pain, residues left of pain that you have suffered, and pain that the whole of humanity has suffered. That Eckhart calls that field of pain the pain body that lives in humans, and maybe certain pain bodies are predominantly angry. They have the vibration of anger. Other pain bodies have the vibration of great fear. Other pain bodies have the vibration of heaviness, sadness, depression, whatever the predominant vibration of the pain body is in your case. But it is human pain. Be aware of that. And whenever this pain body gets activated, don't try to escape from it. Don't try to repress it, but accept it as it is. Because that pain body, with that you will have to face periodically. Because the human pain body has two stages, dormant and active. When it's dormant, you might feel not so bad. There is still the egoic searching for future and being uneasy in the present moment and looking for the next moment, and it's never quite enough, of course. That's still there, but you can live with that when it is dormant. But then the pain body becomes active. Periodically it needs to become active because it needs to take in more food, it needs more pain. It needs the experience of further pain. And you can easily see that in your life. Very often, when a little trigger in the form of a thought, somebody saying something or little thing going wrong, bring up suddenly an enormous amount of emotional pain. And that emotional pain or anger or happiness, it moves into the mind. And without knowing it, it controls your thinking. And your thinking then reflects the energy of the pain body. Angry thoughts, depressed thoughts, fearful thoughts. Every thought feeds the pain body because thought is an energy form. The pain body loves it. It loves to run your mind. So when your pain body is active, and it may last for a few hours, it may last for a few days, the active period, the incessant mental noise that people are trapped in that is bad enough even when the pain body is not amplifying it. The incessant mental noise that humans are trapped in becomes of unbearable heaviness or unbearable fear, and your heart almost can't live with that anymore. And it moves into the mind and it feeds on your thinking. And it loves it. In other words, you're identified with the pain body. When you drop this identification, you will feel the release. But of course, the question is how to drop this identification. Whenever you are identified with the pain body, even it will feed on other people. The pain body, when it possesses you, it will try other people to give you pain. You will then provoke some drama in your relationship so that you can get the feedback of pain from your wife or husband or somebody in the family or somebody close to you. One could call the pain body the addiction to pain in human beings. And this addiction uses the past traumas, the past pain that you lived through. And so when that is operating, you don't know what you're doing. You're simply at the mercy of unconscious movement of needing to express human pain. The pain flows into the mind and amplifies the story of me, which then becomes very unhappy, extremely unhappy, a very unhappy story, a very unhappy self. It makes the sense of self very, very heavy. But in egoic delusion, even that the ego likes, because the painful ego is a very strong ego. And it's looking for somebody else to make unhappy. It wants to make someone unhappy, and usually it succeeds. And so once it has taken on enough food from somebody close to you as feedback of emotional pain, your mind, it subsides and you feel a little bit better. And then a few days later or a couple of weeks later, it comes up again. And so here the uncompromising yes will very often apply not so much to what arises externally in your life in this now, but also what arises internally in this now. And sometimes what arises internally will be a pain moment. And a certain degree of alertness is needed here, so that the deeply conditioned, very old pain movement doesn't overpower you and use your thoughts again. And then you become it, and you're forced to act it out until it leaves you for a little while. It is still there, but it becomes dormant. So alertness is needed so that you can watch the arising of the pain body as it happens directly. So it cannot use your mind, feed on your thinking. You watch it, and what do you do with it? It is. You allow it to be. You allow the form that this moment takes to be. Do you realize that surrendering is a great state of power rather than being a weakness? As presence arises in you, which is that unconditioned consciousness, it will be easier to stay present. So you bring that alert presence that comes with unconditionally accepting what is. If your thinking mind is going to disturb that process by saying this is a weakness, it's unacceptable, etc., unconditionally accepting what is going to make it a living proof experientially to that egoic sense of self. In this alert presence, you will not look for yourself in anything that arises. You're not the pain body, it is human pain. It seeks to become a self to strengthen the illusion of self, a me. When you observe it, the pain body is not a self anymore. It's simply a human pain. It's not using your mind and becomes the illusion of self. So that is the transition to the new state of consciousness that is happening now. The vital thing here is that alert presence that comes with a yes. This alert presence and acceptance are one. That is the arising of the unconditioned consciousness. And you realize you are not that which arises in this now. That's the form it takes. You don't seek yourself in that form anymore. You allow it. It's fine because you already live in the world of form. Of course, there needs to be some form in the now. But there is no self-seeking through allowing the form. And you know yourself to be not that which happens, but the space in which it happens, the stillness in which it happens, the field of now in which everything happens. You know yourself as that, and that is the end of self-seeking in future or in some form that you could add. You can suddenly see the delusion of self-seeking through adding some form to me. This is so simple. That is the essential teaching. Allowing this moment to be is a very gentle thing. But it's also a very radical thing to do. And from now on, as you go away from here at any given time, often you will realize whether you are in a state of no internally or whether you are in a state of yes internally. And you recognize more and more when the no is still there. It has a momentum in case there's another no in whatever form. And so if you catch yourself in another no to what is, what can you do? You allow it. You bring the yes into the no. No matter what happens, bring yes into it. Always the yes. That is the most empowered human state. Every sage that ever lived, every spiritual teacher, every spiritual master lived in that state that we could call the surrendered state of consciousness. Not a state of weakness, but a state of great power. Only to the little egoic entity, this surrendered state of consciousness sounds like a weakness. The surrendered state of consciousness. Totally. And then you emanate love, peace, compassion, aliveness, and enormous creativity comes through you. It will express itself in some form. No more suffering is created out of that state. In the surrendered state, nothing that you do in this now is a means to some end that is regarded as more important. The now is never reduced anymore to a means to an end, which is part of the normal mad state where the now is always a means to an end. The now is honored totally. It is not reduced to a means to an end. That is the surrender state. That means whatever you do in the now has a beauty and an aliveness to it because it is honored so completely. You may have read certain ancient scriptures. They speak of that also. It is the end of karma. Surrendered action is the end of karma. Non-surrendered action keeps you trapped in karma. That's very simple. Surrender is the end of that. Now, you had enough pain. Millions of years of pain. Isn't that enough? How much time you need? Do you think you need another 20 years? And maybe 10 lifetimes? There's so much suffering on this planet. There's so much suffering even in your individual life. If not now, when? Enter the surrender state of consciousness. And this is nothing to do with resignation. It is misunderstood most of the time. Well, I can't do anything anyway, so I might as well accept where I am stuck. No, that's not it. It is yes, I welcome this moment as it is. I welcome it totally. An enormous power is released for action also if needed. Not the useless action that the ego gets involved in. If action is required, action arises unpremeditated. It simply happens. Presence. Presence through the yes. The arising of presence. The new state of consciousness. The surrendered state of consciousness.